Thank you. Good morning. Day number 17, cross-examination.
Please, court, Your Honor.
Yes.
Good morning, Dr. Riemer.
Good morning.
Let me at the outset say we're going to be just yesterday, as you went through direct, we saw some very graphic images, and I apologize, but we're going to have to do that again today. You, of course, this is what you see every day, but I'm sure you understand how other people may, especially people related to the deceased, might react to that.
Of course.
Now, let me also explain at the outset, until I read your autopsy report, I had never really considered the mechanics of a shotgun or an AR-15 or blackout impact on a human body. So I'm learning even as we speak, and I hope I can learn some things today that help me understand your opinions and also help me understand what may have happened or didn't happen, okay? So if I ask you questions that seem simplistic, understand my understanding of this process is somewhat basic. So I'm going to try to walk through this in a way I can glean what the evidence is and what your conclusions are, okay?
Absolutely.
So tolerate my somewhat sophomoric approach to this, if you would, okay?
Of course. I'm sure you'll be fine.
So let me understand, first of all, let's talk about Maggie for just a minute. And were you shown photographs of the back of her thigh that were taken at the scene?
No,
The back of her calf, I'm sorry.
I did not.
Okay. So let me see if I can find these. And it'll take me just a second. I thought I had them laying right out here. Beg the court's indulgence, one moment. I apologize. I thought I had everything sitting right here. Apparently, I may. Okay, here we go.
Harpoon, if there's an item in evidence, you don't have to show it to opposing counsel to continue with the witness.
This is not in evidence. I apologize. Your Honor, I would offer into evidence Defendant's Exhibit 115.
Any objection?
No objection from the state, Your Honor.
And could I get that, please, on the screen? Have you seen that photograph before?
No, I have not.
Okay. In your, I noticed in your autopsy report, you remark that there is a bruise on the back of the leg in that similar position, correct?
Oh, I don't recall.
Could you look, please? Thank you.
I don't see in my report where I'm remarked of a bruise on the left leg.
Okay, so was there a bruise on the right leg?
I don't have any, I didn't make any comment about that in my report.
So no one asked you to opine about any issue on the back of her left calf?
No, and I did not observe that at autopsy.
And by the time it got to autopsy, had her body been washed or
No.
Okay, but if this is mud, you wouldn't necessarily expect to see it.
It could have fallen off, correct.
Correct. So, you were not asked to opine about whether this was whether there was bruising on the back of the left calf, which would have been consistent with somebody stepping on her calf.
No, I was not asked about that.
Okay. And you were not shown this photo.
Correct.
Okay. And just to deal with Maggie a little bit further, you testified yesterday that the shots were consistent, I think, with someone circling her.
Well, I didn't actually use that term. I said that she was shot from at one point from behind her and at one point from above her. So that could mean that there was it could mean that she was turning before she got the first one and then fell, because she could have also been moving.
Well,
So
we know that the shooter was moving because some wounds have stippling, stippling and soot. Am I saying that correctly?
well, there was no soot, but
Now,
just
what
we
does
have
soot indicate?
soot is a contact wound.
Okay.
So she had stippling, which is not quite contact; it's further back.
3 to 4 feet?
Well, usually we don't see it more than 3 feet away.
Okay.
So it's somewhere within 3 feet.
Okay. And so she may have been turning. The shooter may have been moving straight on. I mean, that's as good an explanation for what you saw as somebody circling her, correct?
Yes, I mean, from my perspective, based on the autopsy, that is a reasonable explanation. Of course.
So the reasonable explanation is she's moving, trying to perhaps avoid being shot, turning around, trying to run, whatever, right?
Well, she could be turning around after getting the initial shots.
Right.
And then if the shooter was still stationary, then she could have gotten that one. So it doesn't imply that she could have been moving, not just the shooter.
Okay. And the ones without stippling were the barrel of the gun would have been more than 4 feet away from her.
Well, it's kind of a rough estimate, but I would say, it would be more than 3 feet, possibly more than
And
that.
that would be the barrel, the end of the barrel of the gun.
That's right, because that's where the gunpowder starts coming out.
That doesn't mean the shooter was 3 feet away. or 4 feet
Absolutely
away.
not, just the barrel of the gun.
Right. And you testified about why there was a wound that would appear to be parallel to her, and your indication is that the shot that would have hit her kidney or pancreas or whatever, she might have been bent over.
No. The injury to the pancreas and kidney was on the right side of the abdomen,
Right.
and that went from front to back and exited the left back. The one that was kind of along parallel to her body was on the left side of the body going up.
So why did you testify that one of the shots would have been so painful she would have bent over? What was that consistent?
Yeah, that was the one to the right side of the abdomen, and the reason I believe it's probable or quite likely that would have caused her to bend over, is because a subsequent shot was going sort of upward in the body. And it's hard to imagine, that wound going upward and then into the head unless she was bent over. So it's a possible explanation of how she was in a position to actually get that gunshot.
So she bent over and it would go upwards. Why?
Because if somebody is standing behind her, and there's no close range here, but at least a few feet away.
So she got shot, turns around, bends over, and then you're saying...
She could have turned around or not turned around. Or I don't know if she turned around or the shooter's moving.
Okay. Did anybody ask you to look at the pattern of ejected shells from the blackout?
I wasn't asked to look at those.
Okay. So your conjecture, opinion, is based on purely the wounds and trying to figure out how that happened.
Yes. So I basically, I do the autopsy. I have everything to do with the body. And at the time, I never heard anything about, I composed my autopsy reports without any reference to the scene.
Okay. So let me move along to Paul for the moment, okay? And you indicate that the first shot would have been buckshot to the chest.
I believe that was most likely the first shot.
Well, because the second shot is basically executes him.
He would have fallen to the ground.
Right. And clearly he was upright when that first shot was made.
Yes.
Okay. And it goes in his chest. And would he have to be turned diagonally to the shooter for it to come out his left armpit?
No, not necessarily.
Well, if he shot straight on with that buckshot, and if that was a contact wound, or
no, it's a close range.
Close range, closer than 3 feet.
Yes.
Okay. Can't estimate how far.
I can't. You'd have to testify.
Okay, so the chest shot, if it's straight on, wouldn't it just go right through his lungs and his heart? And
yes.
Okay.
So this was shot at an angle across. So that might indicate that his body was positioned perpendicular to the shooter. Now, the shooter could also shoot from the side, doesn't necessarily shoot from the front. So we can't be 100% sure about these things.
If you're the shooter and I'm Paul, and you shoot me with that buckshot, if I'm faced to the side, would the results be consistent with your autopsy examination?
Yes.
Okay. And we know that some of those pellets, you think his arm was down by his side.
I feel confident about that.
Okay. And the reason for that is there are pellet holes in his arm, right?
No, that's not the reason. The reason is because there's bruising around the exit wounds. They're kind of shored exits, and then we have corresponding bruising on the underside of the arm. So it indicates that they were in close proximity at the time the pellets exited and then re-entered. Because if there was a distance, we wouldn't have the bruising around those wounds.
Okay. And do the pellets go through his arm?
Yeah, there are pellets that exited through the arm.
And so there's little pellet holes
Correct.
on his arm exiting.
Yes.
Did you see a corresponding entrance wound with the pellets?
Yes, the entrance pellet wounds were on the inside of the arm.
Right, and then they go out, and I think they struck things after that, as far as you know.
I don't know what happened to them after they left the body.
So either the shooter is to his right,
Yes.
shooting across,
Yes.
okay, and you think that shooter would have been closer than 3 feet, but you can't say how
Right.
close.
Right. He could have been to his right, or Paul may have turned his body in that perpendicular manner yes.
But either way, there would have been almost immediate bleeding. Well, not a fatal wound. There would have been immediate bleeding from that wound, correct?
There would have been bleeding. It's hard to say how much, but certainly I would expect some bleeding.
But if there were footprints found halfway into that feed room, and those are Paul's footprints, would that indicate to you that he had stepped in his own blood?
Oh, that's certainly possible.
Okay, not inconsistent with what you have.
Correct.
And that second shot would have come, I mean, as I understand it, Mr. Barber, could you take your coat off and come here, please? I hate to do this to him, but I can't really do it to myself. So, if you would step down here, with permission, Your Honor, may she step down? Okay. And what I'd like to have you do is we need to not block these folks over here. Let's see how we do this. Or that gentleman right there.
You want me to stand back here?
That would be good. And he's fine. They're fine. Well, unless I get in their way. Let me see if I can avoid not falling over. Okay, so we've already talked about this wound. Left side. Okay. This wound, which goes in right about here. Show the jury where the wound went in.
Yeah, it was like between the sternum and the left nipple, so kind of right over there.
Right over there. And Mr. Barber's a little bit taller. He was, I think, 5.
Yeah, I measured his height. I don't recall.
We'll talk about that in a minute, but I believe Mr. Barber's a little bit taller than he was. But I think we need to know that because I'm going to ask you to sort of chart things out. So the entrance wound is here and is consistent with him being, how about Mr. Barber, turn just a little bit that way. So the shot would have gone like this?
Yes, that's approximately correct, and it has a slightly front to back.
Slightly front to back.
Right,
about
but
like
mostly it's right to left.
Okay.
His right to.
How about raise your left arm for me, please? So, and his arm was not raised, but I want to point out it comes out. We're going to see some pictures in a minute. Okay, turn a little bit this way. So, it would have come out right under his arm.
Yes, we do have the exit pellet wounds there.
And we also have wadding, do we not?
Yeah, we have wadding stuck in the underside of his left armpit.
And then it goes through his arm.
Yes.
Still coming front to back?
Well, it's left to right, but there is a slight front to back because we have some exit wounds on the back.
Okay, so if I told you this is a narrow room,
Okay.
have you seen any crime scene photos?
From here? No.
From
Oh yeah, from this case, crime scene photos in my career, yes.
in this case?
I really didn't. I may have been shown a very small photo, like a couple of weeks ahead of trial, but I didn't form any opinions based on
If I
that.
told you that small room, the gap between some stacks of dog food here and the wall and the little thing over here is maybe 3 to 4 feet, and this buckshot goes through the back window on this very narrow, very small. So that would be consistent with what you're saying. Some of the buckshot comes through, and that was buckshot that you shot with in the chest.
Yeah, it was shot. I don't remember the exact size.
Right.
Buckshot is usually bigger, but
Okay, assume I'm not
Yeah.
misleading you, okay?
Right, some shot.
Buckshot
yeah,
goes through and hits the back window.
Uh-huh.
That leaves holes in the window and hits in the door, the window frame, and goes out. One of them embeds in a tree back behind. So that is consistent with your findings, correct?
Yes.
That first shot. I'm sort of intrigued. Is there anything about the exterior of this shot? What's beveling? You know what a bevel is, beveling?
Yes, of course. Beveling is a pattern of defect through a bone. So when there's a gunshot wound that, for instance, goes through, let's say we could get an entrance wound over here and an exit wound over here. We're talking about handgun wounds generally. The way when there's basically a hole in one side of the skull, I can tell which is an entrance and which is an exit, even without looking at the skin. Okay, so for instance, if I get skeletonized remains with a hole through the head, I can see which is the entrance and which is the exit because the bone bevels in a characteristic way depending on the direction of the bullet.
What is a bevel?
Yeah, bevel is like an angled chipping away of a hard surface.
So as a bullet goes through, and I guess the head is that's good as all bone, right?
Well, it's like a solid bone, right?
Right. So you can tell this is the entrance because is it like?
It's the entrance on the outer table of the skull. It's a smaller hole. On the inner table of the skull, it's a bigger hole. So the bone is beveling outward as the bullet goes in.
So it would bevel in on the entrance and bevel out on the exit?
Yeah, well, bevel in, meaning sometimes people don't always use these words consistently, even forensic pathologists. But there is a inward beveling, but means it's kind of beveled outward. So
bevel outward, inside the wound, you see something that would indicate
wider. Yes,
wider.
It's wider on the inner table of the skull than the outer table.
And when it exits, do you have a narrower bevel, if you will, or defect on the inside than on the outside?
Yes.
That was a lot. Okay. So, was there, since this didn't enter bone, is there beveling with the flesh?
No, it doesn't bevel because there's too much elasticity and also just shredding. Frequently, we can't see beveling on long bones either. The skull is kind of a flat bone, so it has that characteristic.
Okay, and the second shot, as I understand it, you indicate well, first of all, assume that he is, no, you can't assume that. So maybe we just forget about the feed room for just a minute, okay? So show the jury, please, where the initial, there's a shot, it's shot with a shotgun.
Yes.
And it is more than, since there's no stippling or sud or anything that would indicate a close shot, correct?
Correct.
So more than 3 or 4 feet away.
More than 3, yes.
More than 3. And where is the initial shot? Where does it hit him?
On the top of the left shoulder.
When you say the top,
The apex.
okay, are there pellets in here?
Yes.
In the apex?
Yes.
And I'm going to show you an X-ray in just a minute and have you demonstrate on Mr. Harper, where that hit. And there's shot in here.
Yes.
And you indicated you thought his chin was bent to the
Yeah,
right.
this is something that I believe not necessarily have to be bent, but I do think it was at least tilted in this direction. The reason being, if this is in a horizontal direction and then goes through his cheek, let's say he's just your head up, okay? And let's say it's just going through here, and it would just kind of hit like over this side of his head, okay? But meanwhile, it's kind of over here. So, and then the exit wound is back there. So at least we have a little bit of directionality like this. I don't know, if he was completely turned to the left, it would have gone through his face. But I think it makes the most sense knowing that a wound travels in a straight line, basically. Of course, these are pellets, so there's going to be a lot of destruction. But the fact that his face was spared from damage indicates to me that he had his head somewhat turned, or I don't know exactly how much, but that it kind of coursed the top of the left shoulder into this left, neck, cheek area, and then exited the back of the head on the top.
Let me find the X-ray pictures while he's standing up there. Here we go. Good. Wait 1 second. Excuse me, Dr. Riemer. I'm going to show you where you're standing right there, these pictures, and see if you can identify them. And if so, we'll put them in evidence, and then I'll put them up on the screen. So I'd like you to look at these three photos and tell me if you can identify them. Am I speaking loud enough for the court reporter? Am I speaking loud enough when I'm facing that way? Okay.
Yes, these are X-rays that were taken at the commencement of the autopsy.
Okay. Your Honor, I would offer defendant's exhibits 111, 112, and 113.
No objection, Your Honor.
They're admitted.
So could I have, please, step over just a little bit that way. There is. Okay, I'm sorry. Oh, that's much better. Okay, so let's see. Okay, let's see 113, please. Okay, so this is his left arm, correct?
Yes.
And this material up here, we see these little dots. What is that?
Yeah, those are the shotgun pellets.
Okay. And they are, yeah, that's perfect. And so we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Along that line, 20. Along these would be pellets that would be along here, correct?
Yes.
And they begin at, is this his shoulder? I mean, the shoulder bone?
Yes, it's no, the soft tissue of the shoulder. The soft tissue of the shoulder.
Okay, I'll give you the
Yeah,
pointer. You
okay.
know what you're doing.
Yeah, this is the humeral head.
Which would
Humeral head, which
should
is
show on Mr. Barber where that
Yeah,
is.
this is the bone of the humerus. So our humerus is that long bone from the shoulder joint to the elbow joint, and we can see that this is basically, it's not really perforating the bone. There may be some defect at the edge of the bone, but it's pretty much on top in the soft tissues.
Okay, and it goes on for a ways, and then if you would show me exhibit number 112. Okay, and would you focus on the upper right-hand corner, please? Here you go. Now, that corresponds to this large picture, that orientation.
Yes.
Okay, so what is this showing us?
There are significant numbers of pellets also in like the left neck area.
Show us on Mr. Barber where that would be.
Yeah, so the entrance is here, and pellets are basically spreading, so they're including, there are pellets in the left side of the neck area over here, and then there's also some going into the brain.
Okay. And let me see if I can count those. So, I mean, are these part of what we looked at before?
Yes.
Okay. And how far down did the new one start?
It's a different view, so may not include all of them.
Okay. So, but a number of them.
Yeah, I mean, the purpose of the X-rays is basically to show what kind of ammunition remains in the body, if any.
Did you remove these pellets?
Not every single one, a representative number.
Okay, so there's an exhibit that was shown to you by Mr. Waters of some pellets that you
Yes.
recovered, but that's not all the pellets you recovered.
That's all the pellets I recovered. I don't stay for days to recover each pellet. It's actually a lot harder than it looks. Here they look like you know exactly where they are, but you can fish for like an hour to find one pellet. It's fairly small and there's a lot of tissue, and
So you got-
I
you
get a
got-
handful of them, and that's sufficient.
Did you keep the buckshot separate from the birdshot? Because this is birdshot.
I don't think any of it was actually buckshot. Buckshot is very large, so they were all. I believe they were all collected together.
Okay, so you thought they were all birdshot?
No, I didn't make that conclusion. They're some kind of shot. I didn't make a determination.
So you didn't determine that?
Yeah, that's really the firearms. I'm the pathologist. It's the firearms expert to determine what kind of shot it is.
So,
I said shotgun pellets, and that's
Right, so-
sufficient.
if previous expert testimony was that the chest was a buckshot and the head was duck shot or some sort of bird shot, you're not going to disagree with that?
I really didn't. It all looked similar to me.
Okay. Now, let me see Exhibit 111, please. And can you, I guess the lower left, well, maybe not. Let's start with the lower left of this, his left, lower right there, okay? This is the total picture.
Okay.
And so what does this represent?
Yeah, we can see his upper and lower teeth here, the upper teeth, the lower teeth, and so he actually did not have any fractures of his teeth. So the projectiles were going behind the teeth. His teeth were not all fractured out.
So would you show on Mr. Barber where these pellets would have been?
Yeah, this is just a two-dimensional image. So they're anywhere between, like, here and here.
Okay.
It's hard to say based on a two-dimensional image.
Okay, and I think, show us where you think the exit wound was.
On the right side of the top,
back of his head.
the top of his head,
The top of his head.
toward the back.
Towards
Yes.
the back. And if you were to extend out the shoulder wound, the neck, the path of these pellets, and then the exit wound, I mean, did you actually see an exit wound? Was there?
Yes, it was a blown-out exit wound of the skull, and that is how the brain left the skull.
Well,
It
actually,
had
his
to-
skull exploded, basically, correct?
Well, the skull, and there was a defect there. I could not reapproximate the skull, so there's a piece of skull missing.
Was there a bevel around that piece of skull?
We don't get beveling when there's shattering of the bone.
Okay, we'll pursue that a little bit later.
It's not a typical feature. You could potentially see something that you can say, well, this looks like a little beveling, but in my experience, that's very difficult to assess because there's so much damage and fragmentation of the bone.
Well, take that pointer, please, using Mr. Barber as a mannequin, and show us the path of that shotgun blast.
So it was going along here and into the left side, I believe, makes most sense like this, and out the top of the right side of the head.
So if you, and that was, you say, at least 3 feet away.
Yes.
Okay. Let me have that pointer again, please. And if you would step right over there. And just turn a little bit this way for me. Okay. So your testimony is, and correct me if you need to step over here and correct the angle.
No, I don't like that.
Okay, well, show me what you like.
All right. I like this straight,
Right.
and then because this is basically not, it doesn't look like it's going upward. It's going straight and then entering around there. So we have two distinct defects, a defect here and a defect there. So I believe the head was at least angled a little bit like that in order for the corresponding continuation of that defect to go in there. But I don't think it's going upward. I think looking at the left shoulder, it looks like it's kind of and if it was going upward, we wouldn't have as much in the neck as we do. So I think it's more like straight on.
Well, that would still be coming upward at some angle, right?
No, I think it's more straight. I really,
Well, how does it come out the top of his head?
Well, that's because if his head is like bent like that,
Right.
then it's going to go in that direction. Yes.
If it's straight, it's going to go here and then out the top of his head?
Well, it absolutely could. The thing about the neck, heads can be twist and turn, so it's not at all inconsistent with that. It's most reliable that we can look at the shoulder wound and see that it's kind of, it's very difficult to assess the angle from where you're standing, and that's only because the head can bend and twist, and so we can only know where it entered and where it exited, and it's possible the head could have been twisted or turned to correspond to
Would
that.
it be more consistent if he turned your head the other way, Mr. Barber? Like that to get it out the top of the head?
That could be. However, we have a defect over here. So
Okay.
how would that happen?
Pull your head back and keep it over in that direction. In other words, let me adjust him. Back and then over that way.
Yeah.
Is that consistent with it coming in here, going this way, and then out the
Yes.
top of the
I
head?
think that the head tilt to the right, as you've just demonstrated,
Right.
is perfectly consistent with that. However, because the hole here is here, I think even if his head's to the right, it would still be turned like that. Okay, now that makes sense to me.
So,
Right.
So the shooter would be at least 3 feet away from that right there, right?
Yes.
And would he have it up or would he have it down? Or
It's hard to say, and that's because the head can tilt. We only have one area of an entrance to interior. It seems to be approximately horizontal, but it's impossible for me to say whether it's the entrance is kind of below him or at his level or potentially above him with Paul leaning over. It's hard to know, and that's because people aren't necessarily standing up straight, and they also, the thing about injuries on the head and neck, there's so much twisting and bending possible.
Okay, Ms. Barber, stand up straight. You get the prick there? Okay, I'm sorry. So now what you tell us is basically from here back on his skull, they can see. Why don't you stand over there for just a second so we don't block him. From here back on his skull, and I've looked at your autopsy pictures, all this is gone.
To the right side.
To the
Yes,
right
and
side.
there were fractures on the left.
Okay.
So we know it's going in a left-right direction.
Do you have a seat for a moment, please? Thank you. I may be done with you, but don't put your coat back on. Okay, if you go ahead and take the stand again, please. Okay, let me ask you a couple preparatory questions. Are you familiar with this book?
Yes.
Okay, and it is like a definitive, I'm told most pathologists have read this. And
Yeah, it's a highly respected book on gunshot wounds.
Okay. So, if you go to page 228 in this book, sorry. Can you identify this as page 228 in this book? those images?
Yes,
Oh,
228.
showing, let's say, a copy of page 228. Defendant's Exhibit 116. Is this a copy of what I just showed you out of the book?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, we'd offer this into evidence.
Says the state.
Your Honor, no objection.
So admit it.
Thank you. Okay, could I have this on the screen, please? Can you do this for me? Would you start, show me the first two slides up top along with what's written there. Okay, so the caption on this is show the sequence of events that occur at the muzzle on the firing of a shotgun. Note the large gas cloud that is partially responsible for the severe nature of the wounds in the contact range. So the first A is the shotgun being fired, correct?
That's what it looks like, yes. I didn't
Okay.
read the captions.
What now?
There's captions at the bottom.
Are there
Yeah,
captions at the bottom?
so-
Okay. No, I don't think there are, but I'll show you the book.
Okay. Okay, so I imagine that's sequence, right? Okay.
I didn't write the book.
No, that's fine. Okay.
So the sequence of a shotgun shell being fired are, the first one is it being fired. The second one, note the large gas cloud that is partially responsible for the severe nature of the wounds on contact. And the third one is at contact range. And then you see on the last one,
I don't see them on my screen.
I'm sorry. Okay,
Yeah.
go down to the last two. There you go, C and D. You see the, I guess, at the front end would be the pellets and the gas would be preceding the pellets. Is that correct?
No, I don't think that's correct. This is depicting contact range. It specifically says at contact range.
Right.
So pellets are not yet released from the wadding.
Okay, well, we're going to go a little bit further on that in a minute. Let me,
Yeah.
referring again to, well, let me ask you this question. If this book says contact shotgun wounds of the head are among the most mutilating firearm wounds there are, you would agree with that?
Yes,
Extensive destruction of bone and soft tissue structures with bursting ruptures of the head are the rule rather than the exception. Correct?
yes,
These are the wounds of which an individual is said to have had blown his head off, right?
yes,
In some cases, this is almost literally true. The skull may be largely fragmented and the brain pulpified. Large fragments of the cranial bulb and cerebral hemispheres are often ejected from the head. The scalp is extensively lacerated due to two factors: the charge of the shot entering the skull and the gas from combination of the propellant.
Objection to the form of the question, Your Honor.
What is the question?
Does this, and one pathologist told me this is the Bible of gun wounds for pathologists, is that correct?
well, there's a lot of literature, and this is a highly respected primary source. It's not the only. But what are you asking me about?
Does the shot, well, are there two factors which contribute the things we just talked about, the shattering, perhaps even the ejection of the brain? Are there two factors the charge of the shot entering the skull, and the gas from combustion of the propellant.
Okay. Well, he's actually discussing contact shotgun
Yes, ma'am.
wounds,
Just-
and that's not what we have here, but we have similar destruction.
Right. Well, we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But this is about a contact wound. I agree.
Okay.
You have not indicated it was a contact wound.
Correct.
We're going to talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
The shot, the shot directly, does the shot on a contact wound from a shotgun directly fracture the skull and shreds the brain while at the same time producing pressure waves that increase the severity of these injuries as well as ejecting the brain tissue?
Yes, it frequently happens that way.
Okay. The gas entering the closed chamber of the head expands rapidly, I'll make this a question so we don't get objected to. Does the gas entering the closed chamber of the head expand rapidly, adding to the pressure waves, acting on the bony framework of the skull? The only way for the skull to relieve the pressure produced is to shatter.
I would agree with that.
Okay. So, it's your opinion that, well, let me ask you this. If the shotgun muzzle was 3 to 4 feet away, would gas have entered the body?
Well, it's still a very destructive wound. In my experience, there is still a huge amount of energy that would enter the head from a shotgun wound, even if it's not contact.
Okay, and perhaps I misstated the question. Would gas, just a yes or no
Yeah.
be fine, from 4 feet away enter the body and be destructive?
Yeah, I don't know if it's gas that's causing the destruction, but there must be some amount of energy that's causing this destruction, because a shotgun wound to the head, no matter what the distance, causes. But whether it's due to a gas or not, I really can't answer that question. This is not something I've done not experiments like this, as in the book.
But this is a book you check for reference, correct?
Well, it's a good source, but I don't know whether gas would be responsible for the destruction of the skull from a few feet away. There is destruction of the skull. I don't know if it's attributed specifically to gas or to other factors. So I really can't answer that. And if he says that, that's fine. But I don't know. He's talking about a contact wound. I can't not necessarily extend that conclusion to what would happen a few feet away. But there is frequently destruction of the head.
I understand that there was massive destruction of the head. I'm just trying to get my arms around the definitive work on one of the definitive works indicates that the most instances, the vast majority, that kind of destruction is caused by gas on a contact wound.
Well, this is a mechanism that he's describing based on experimental data, and I'm a forensic pathologist. I've not performed this kind of experimental data, and nor would I extrapolate from his conclusions about a contact gunshot wound to whether the same amount of gas is produced at a distance.
Well, ma'am, and Dr. Riemer, we can walk through this, but these are based not on some experiment, but actually on people that typically shot themselves in the head, contact wound with a shotgun. Would that surprise you?
These are depictions of shotguns being fired. Contact shotgun wounds to the head cause massive destruction, and a lot of that is from gas buildup.
Okay, now we're on the same page, literally. So it's your position, there's a lot of energy when it's fired from 3 or 4 feet away, hits the shoulder, hits the neck, comes through, and hits the head, and the head explodes, correct?
Yes.
And have you had a number of autopsies you've done of victims whose heads have exploded as a result of a shotgun?
Yes.
Okay. And many of those were contact suicide wounds?
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever had one, and we can talk about the details of that, where someone was shot from 3 or 4 feet away, no initial contact with the head? You would agree, no initial contact with the head.
Correct.
It goes through the shoulder, the neck, and then the head explodes. Have you ever had one of those?
Yes, these are very dynamic, and he still actually had a lot of his head there. Sometimes with the shotgun, when the entire head is basically, you don't really see very much up above like the teeth. Right. So this was, there was obviously horrible destruction of this skull, but his face was intact, and frequently a contact causes fractures of the face. So, I don't see any evidence of contact range discharge on the left side of the neck. So it was not my conclusion. That was not my opinion that this is a contact shotgun wound.
Well, let's talk a little bit about this. Your position is the energy by a shotgun blast that went through the arm, through the neck, and then up to the brain still had enough energy. Is it the energy caused by, is it pellets going into the brain?
Yes, well, not just pellets, but there's also fracturing of the base of the skull, which is a bone that holds underneath the skull, and that fracturing with sufficient force can actually push the brain out.
And
so it's a variety of mechanisms that could contribute to the destruction and the loss of brain tissue.
It not only pushes, it fractures the skull. In this case, the brain was brought to you in a separate bag because it ended up laying at his feet. It went up in the air and then plopped down at his feet, correct?
Yes.
Okay. The entire brain?
Most of it, yeah, except for the brain stem.
It exploded out of his head?
Yes.
And the skull was at least almost destroyed around where you say the exit wound is, correct?
Yes.
Now, you've indicated the state did not show you any crime scene photos, correct?
Yeah, I really didn't look at them. Yeah, I mean, they might have said, "Oh, here, this is a picture of the wall," but I didn't look at them, and they were thumbnail size. So this is a couple of weeks before trial.
Okay, now if you would put back up exhibit number, here we go. Exhibit number 112, please. No, I don't think, is that 112? That's the chest. I apologize. 113. Can you focus on that area where the pellets are, please? Yeah, that right there. So, at his shoulder, how big a spread is that? As it comes in, is it 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches, 5 inches, that wound?
I didn't measure the spread of the pellets.
Okay. So, how about, I apologize to the jury, this is pretty graphic. How about pull up 109? Okay, so this depicts a very big wound in the shoulder, correct?
Yeah, that's a typical appearing shotgun entrance wound.
Okay, and would you come down here for just a second, please? We done? Hold on, wait 1 second. You're right. I need to offer these.
Your Honor, the statement requests that the defense put an exhibit and address before the show to the jury.
I apologize, Your Honor. And this is exhibit number. Got multiples of these. What's this exhibit number? I'm sorry. 109. 109. Okay. Yeah. Here it is. I apologize, Your Honor. I got ahead of myself. Won't take 2 seconds. 110, 110, 109. Here we go. This is state defense exhibit number 109. Have you seen that before?
Yes, this is my autopsy photo.
Offered into evidence, Your Honor.
Submitted.
Would you put it up the screen, please? Now, as we look at this photo, we see this is the entrance wound,
Yes,
and then it goes in here, correct?
that's correct.
So, but this is a much larger wound than the next one in line, is it not?
Well, that's okay.
Well, let me ask you this. In terms of understanding a shotgun pattern, as we saw in the photo, starts out basically the size of the shell, right? But if you just answer the question, and then you can explain. Does it start out as the same size as the shell?
Yes.
Okay. And as it goes forward, the pattern expands, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And it continues to expand even after it hits something, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So now please explain to me why this wound, and it looks like it's, I mean, if you use me on my left shoulder, what is the
Yes. I'd be delighted to tell you why this entrance wound is larger than this one, even though what you said is correct about the spread. And that's because the entrance wound to the left shoulder, it's not straight on, perpendicular. If it was straight on perpendicular, then we would have a smaller hole. But this is going in a tangential manner across. So we're not really looking at a perpendicular, entrance wound that's going to make a round hole. So as it's coursing along the top of the left shoulder, we get more of an oblong hole. In contrast, its continuation into the left side of the cheek is kind of straight on at a 90-degree angle. So that's why that is smaller. So there was nothing about this that was inconsistent with what I would expect from a shotgun wound.
So tell me, so you're saying this shot, this second hole was made in this direction. Is that what you're saying?
I just said that was a continuation of the logical sequences. It went through here, it's causing a lot of destruction, and then entered the left side of the neck.
So that big wound is because it's in a different direction than the small wound, is your explanation?
At a different angle,
right,
along the surface of the skin.
Okay, and there's no pellets in his face, are there?
There were some pellets that we saw in the X-ray.
But not in his face?
Not in the front of his face.
Right. So as it continues on, is there any evidence that it expands even more?
Well, it did cause, there's so much destruction, we can't exactly, have a single, easily tracked path. Because when the skull is involved, there's so much expansion, usually either from gases or just from the blast of the projectiles, that we can't really track. It caused an exit on the right side of the back of the head with loss of the brain, and lots of skull fractures, predominantly on the right side.
Okay. But you would agree with me that wound appears to be much larger than the next wound?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Okay. And one explanation, you have an explanation for that. Could the other explanation be that this is an exit wound and that is an exit wound? Could that be a reasonable explanation? I'm going to show you something in a minute that may assist you in making that decision. But is it a possibility?
That is not, I do not believe this is consistent with an exit wound from a shotgun. There would be a lot more destruction because, it would be coming, it had to be coming from somewhere, right? Somewhere else.
How about a contact wound on the head, on the right back of the head? What would you expect to see on the bone structure of the back right of the head if that was a contact wound on the head?
Well, I would not expect the brain to come out. We would have had opening of a lot of skull. We would have had a path through the brain, which is not at all what happened here.
So if there was a contact wound, and we saw a moment ago, and you agree, that the gas would enter first, explode the skull, the brain would pop out. Did you find any pellets in the brain?
I don't remember if they were from the brain, but the brain was basically intact. A contact gunshot wound to the top of the head would cause, a huge defects of the brain.
Right, because the gas going in on a contact wound would create such a pressure, as we just read, that the skull would explode and the brain would pop out.
No, I don't think that would happen from a wound that was going toward the brain from above. I think we would have certainly destruction of the brain, but it wouldn't just pop out because it's in the path of fire. There's going to be massive destruction of the brain. It may end up on the floor, but it's going to be in multiple fragments. So in my experience doing this for a long time, I do not think that the brain would have popped out the way it did from an entrance wound on the top of the head.
Okay. Now, let me ask you to look at would you put, and this is under seal, and I would also, Your Honor, ask the other photos I put in be put under seal.
They're under seal.
Thank you. Would you put defense exhibit number 59, and I apologize to the jury for the graphic nature of this. Go ahead. Okay, I would like you, do you recognize this?
I've not seen this photograph.
Would you disagree with me that's a photograph of, it's been testified, Paul Murdaugh
It does
at
look,
the scene?
Yes.
And the way he was found? You've
I
never
don't
seen,
know how he was found.
okay, but this is a photograph you've never seen.
I've never seen this photograph.
Okay, let me get one thing before I ask you questions about it. Okay, a couple things. If you would center on his head. Okay. And make it a little bit, can you make it a little bit bigger, please? Okay. So do you see a sort of semicircle defect in the skull right here? You see where I'm looking?
Do it again.
Right here?
I do see a defect, yes.
Right, in the skull.
Yes.
Semicircle.
It does have a semicircular.
Okay. Can you determine from looking at the photograph any beveling?
As I said earlier, beveling is not really too reliable when we have so much destruction of the head. But if you're asking me if that could have been a contact shotgun wound to the top of the head with a kind of curved entrance, I would expect to see soot we always get soot from contact wounds, and it's deposited on the outer table of the skull. So there is no burning, no soot on the outer table of the skull to support that.
Did you take an autopsy photo of this area of the skull?
Well, when he came in, I do believe I took an area of the skull, but it may not have caught that perfectly.
Okay. Did you shave his head?
No, I did not.
You did shave Maggie's head for a head wound, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And why didn't you shave his head? To examine this, you would agree with me, had his head been shaved, you would have had a better look at this wound.
Well, I believe that my assessment of it was correct, and without usually shaving is along an entrance wound, not an exit wound. So I determined this was an exit, and shaving is not done on exit wounds. I shaved Maggie's because that was an entrance wound, and it gives me an opportunity to see the margins of the entrance defect.
I guess what I'm asking is, you decided that was an exit wound without shaving the head, without looking for stippling, without looking for soot, because you would agree with me that to do that, effectively you'd have to shave the head.
To observe marks on the skin, yes. But
Okay.
also there would be soot on the outer table of the skull.
Well, did you look for it? You apparently had already decided.
Yeah, well, I did look. I didn't take a picture from this angle necessarily. I did take a picture after from the top of his head. But my determination, based on my experience, was that the entrance wound was over here. Doesn't mean somebody else cannot disagree with me. But that's my opinion.
Somebody could disagree with you, and that would be a reasonable disagreement.
Well, I would say that people can disagree, but that doesn't mean that doesn't change the truth.
You would also agree with me, though, that your notes contain no mention of the lack of or presence of stippling or soot on that part of his head. You never looked for it, did you?
Well, I look for it. I look at all of the wounds, and if there was, I would have documented it. But I don't document the absence of soot or stippling on what I determined to be an exit wound.
And I don't see any note of yours where you examined that exit wound in detail. I mean, shaved his head, looked for some distortion that would be inconsistent with the conclusion you'd already come to, correct?
Well, I came to the conclusion based on my examination of the entire area.
Okay, and as this book indicates, the vast majority of this kind of damage, the vast majority, I mean, they say most probably, almost certainly, is a contact wound to the head that injects the gas, which explodes the head. Is that not true?
No, I do think that you're kind of you're extending his statement. He's describing contact gunshot wounds to the head. Actually, a contact gunshot wound to the top of the head like that, like I told you, it would have caused fragmentation of the brain, not ejection of the brain, based on my experience. And then there would be a lot more, we would have a lot more fragments. It would never have just left the rest of the skull intact. We would have had fractures of the face. There's massive amount. I don't believe that the fractures of his skull are consistent with that being a contact shotgun wound. I understand that that is a massive destruction of the head from shotgun wounds. But in this case, we do have the brain basically left intact. We don't have a path through the brain. It's a very dynamic, there's gases, there's pellets, there's fractured bone. But in my opinion, based on my experience, that was not an entrance wound, and that this was not an exit.
And you indicated, I looked at your autopsy report, that well, first of all, do you believe this was caused by pellets entering the brain cavity?
No, I think it's a combination of different things. I don't think it's from pellets specifically.
What was it?
I think it's from the gas buildup in the brain and fractures of the skull, and that just basically a lot of gas buildup.
So where did those gases come from?
Yeah, it's a huge amount of energy from a shotgun.
I'm sorry, if you'd answer my question. Where did the gases you just testified that caused this destruction come from?
From the shotgun wound.
A shotgun wound you testified was created by a weapon that was more than 4 feet away. The gases traveled through the air, traveled through that shoulder wound, traveled through the neck, and then exploded his head.
It's not just gases, but it's a combination of gases and the pellets as well.
But there would have been a significant amount of gas involved to explode his head.
Yes.
And there would be pellets. Would they be present in the brain after that brain exploded?
The brain, the pellets may not have reached the brain. The brain may have been ejected just by virtue of the skull fragmenting and base of the skull pushing it up. It's not possible for me to say exactly why the brain came out here.
But you would agree with me, based on the literature, it's much more common for a contact wound where the gas goes in contact to explode the head.
Well, in my experience, a contact shotgun wound could cause this type of damage, but it would frequently cause even more damage. Like a lot of times there's just massive destruction of the entire head. At least the front of his head front of his face where bones were intact.
I hear what you're saying is that it would have produced massive destruction, but it would have always included massive destruction of the face.
Okay. Well, let me tell you, there are other reasons why I concluded that the entrance wounds were here. Okay. We have basically a bunch of tight pellets over here.
Right.
If they would be more spread out, if the entrance wound was here, by the time it got to here, there'd be a lot more pellets over a wider area.
How many more?
Well, I'm not saying more pellets. I'm saying there would be a wider spread of pellets. This was still in a relatively narrow range. It was along the top of the shoulder.
From my head to my shoulder on a direct line.
Yes.
How far is that?
Well, honestly, the spread would not. I don't believe they would have been as tight along the shoulder. I think we also would have had a larger defect. Probably on the
larger defect.
Yeah, look,
between here and here.
Every single shotgun wound and gunshot wound, they're each a little bit different. So a lot of this is judgment and assessment at the time of the autopsy, and it's not theoretical whether there's gas buildup or not gas buildup. I can see this as a shotgun wound. We have pellet entrance defects around this large defect.
Pellet? You just told me you couldn't do a bevel assessment on skin. How do you know their entrance rather than exit on the skin?
Well, I'll tell you. And the reason is if pellets are going through the shoulder, we wouldn't have a big, large, oblong defect. We would have holes from the pellets, not an oblong, ovoid defect. So you'll recall on his arm, Paul's arm, those pellets, they came from, and then along here, we just basically have pellet exit wounds, and we don't have that on the shoulder. We have basically a larger confluent wound that was not caused by individual pellets.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. If you can take that picture down, please.
Yeah, it's not my opinion that is the entrance wound is to the top of
And
the head.
could you put up? No, we don't even need to do that. I don't need to see the picture. The chest shot goes through his chest, comes out under his arm, right?
Yeah, on the left side, yes.
The left side comes out under his arm. And what do we have? What do we have on the inside and outside of that arm?
We have pellet.
Coming in and out. We have a pattern of pellets.
Yes.
Just like the pattern of pellets that you're talking about on what you say the exit wound here. Exit wound from about the same distance, pellets. From the same distance, pellets, correct?
Well, there are pellets in the shoulder, but we
Yes.
have a ovoid defect at the top of the left shoulder. They're not a bunch of individual pellet wounds. We have pellets embedded in the tissue, but the actual defect, we don't have a defect like that on his arm, even though it may be the same distance. And the reason is because the pellets are exiting, but each one is going through the left arm individually. Okay. Whereas if this was the entrance at the right side of the top of the back of the head, it's a good thought. Let's think about this. And it was coming through the head, regardless of what happened to the brain, and then exited here and then went along here, we would have a lot more individual pellet wounds on the shoulder as opposed to a large, huge, big area of skin and subcutaneous tissue loss. Pellets don't cause that type of damage on their own.
So you and I both counted something between 30 and 40 pellets in that shoulder wound a little while ago, right?
Yeah, there were something like about that.
Do you know how many pellets are in a duck shot or bird shot 12-gauge shell?
No, I don't remember. That
So
is
you
something.
don't know whether that was 90% of the pellets or 60% of the pellets or 50%?
No, I do not.
Would that make a difference to you? How many of the pellets that were fired ended up there?
No.
But you're saying just because the wound here is bigger and the wound in his chin is smaller doesn't mean the shotgun pellets spread out, right? They spread out and they don't contract. You would agree with me? Just please
I don't
answer-
really
please
know
answer.
whether to agree with you because I'm not understanding your question.
Okay, let me rephrase it. If you view that wound on his shoulder as the entrance wound, and I believe you have,
Yes.
you would agree with me that it is, whether it's coming across the top or whatever, it is a bigger wound than the wound in his chin. In other words, are you saying that those were so focused that they, as they went through or across the top, they actually contracted?
No.
Okay.
I explained that this was larger because it was tangential across the top of the shoulder. So
But
that's the kind of wound.
You agree with me that reasonable people could have a difference of opinion about these facts?
Yes.
Okay. Pardon me. Give me just 2 seconds to make sure I put everything in the evidence I want in. Apologize, Your Honor. I've spread everything out over here. I'm going to leave the rest of this until after his examination, if that's okay with the court. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. Your job is to do what? What do you do?
I do an autopsies in order to determine the cause and manner of death.
And when you're asked to do an autopsy, are you told any sort of conclusion to come to, or do you just look at the evidence in the body before you and come to whatever conclusions that body tells you?
Yes, and I examine the body and I come to a conclusion based on reasonable medical certainty based on my education and experience.
So is it part of your job to look at crime scene photos and that sort of thing, or are you relying on what the body tells you?
My job is to look at the body. That's my job. Crime scene photos, crime scene evidence is somebody else's project. That's not incorporated into my conclusion.
I want to talk a little bit. We've gone into a long examination about the top of the head, and you talked about soot and stippling. So I want to make sure the jury understands the difference between the two. You saw stippling on the chest wound to Paul. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Explain to the jury the difference between soot and stippling and what that tells you and what it doesn't tell you.
Okay. So the stippling is like the pieces of gunpowder that deposit on the skin when something is fired within 2 to 3 feet from the barrel of the gun, not the shooter, from the barrel of the gun. Soot is like real burning powder, burning marks from very hot gunpowder that's still basically burning, and it causes like a burning wound. That's the soot, and we don't see soot except within a few inches, depending on the gun. But we would like not expect to see soot further away from 6 inches. So the fact that we have stippling but no soot, we can fairly say it's not closer than 6 inches, even though I know it's most likely within 3 feet.
All right, so you observed stippling on the wound to the chest for Paul, correct?
Yes.
Did you observe stippling anywhere else?
No.
All right. Did you observe any soot at all on Paul's body?
No.
And did you, particularly on the top of the head, did you observe any soot there?
No.
You were asked a little bit, and you had testified yesterday about the tilting of the head and the manner in which the shotgun blast went through the chest, through the shoulder, into the neck, and then out the top of the head.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable conclusion.
Right. And that still is your most likely conclusion, is that
That's
correct?
my most likely conclusion,
All right.
to a reasonable degree of medical certainty. It
So
doesn't mean it's 100% the only thing, but that's my opinion based on my experience.
All right. And how many autopsies have you done?
Approximately 5,500.
And how long you been doing this?
20 plus years.
Okay. Dr. Riemer and Professor Riemer, correct?
Yes.
You were asked about the book, and all that discussion that the defense counsel was talking to you out of the book, that was dealing with a contact wound, correct?
Yes. I mean, I'm not going to disagree with a book, but the discussion is regarding a contact shotgun wound.
All right. And when your expert opinion, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, you saw no evidence of a contact wound in this particular case with Paul, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, you were asked a lot, and let me ask you this. A lot of what was in that book, when they're talking about those contact wounds, they're exploring someone using a shotgun to commit suicide, correct?
Well, frequently contact wounds do indicate a suicide, but potentially people can be shot by another also at contact range.
All right. And your manner of death that you determined for Paul to a reasonable degree of medical certainty was what?
Homicide.
Homicide, which means?
Death at the hands of another.
All right. And did you see, with this shot to the chest or the shot that went through the shoulder into his head, any evidence whatsoever that this could potentially be a suicidal wound?
I do not believe that it was at all consistent with a suicidal wound.
To a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Yes.
In your expert opinion?
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit more about the head wound. And you've been asked a lot of questions about the possibility that this was a contact wound from the top of the head. Is that correct?
Yes.
And your opinion, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, is that it is not?
It was not.
Okay. And let's talk about, just very quickly, without belaboring the point, some of the reasons. First of all, you saw no soot, correct?
Correct.
And then also, with the damage inside Paul's head, did you see any evidence that would indicate that the force of the...
Your Honor.
Did you see any evidence that would indicate to you, from the damage that Paul suffered, that the force of the shot was going this way as opposed to that way? Going down from the top of his head as opposed to going...
Yeah, I don't believe that it was going from the top of his head down. I don't think the damage to the head was consistent with that.
Okay. And with the brain, you said that the brain came to you in a separate container. Is that correct?
Yeah, most of it.
All right.
Yes.
And did you, in examining the brain, did you see any evidence whatsoever that would have been consistent with the force of the shot, including the pellets and everything else, going into the top of the head and into the brain that way?
No, I did not see any evidence of that.
To a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Yes.
Did you find any wadding in Paul's head cavity?
I don't think there was any wadding. You
were asked a lot about the shoulder and how it was, in the picture you were shown, it was more, in that picture at least, it was kind of a gaping sort of wound. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. And his shoulder, was it kind of squinched up in that picture a little bit? I don't know if that's a technical term, squinch, but...
You mean the photograph?
the photograph that you were showing.
Well, I took a picture of his, the shoulder area, yes.
Okay. And just so I understand, as opposed to a direct-on wound and the sort of the size of that, and then a wound that goes along the side of the shoulder, like you identified in this case, explain to the jury again how those are going to create different shapes of wounds.
Yes. So,
Your Honor, not in response. He's asking her to explain again. That would be repetitive.
I sustain the objection.
Was the wound to the shoulder, was that straight on or oblong to the side?
yeah, it was a tangential type of shotgun wound.
With that shoulder wound, that you've identified that as the entrance wound, the initial wound,
Yes,
would you still expect to find the pellets in that wound consistent with what you saw in Paul?
yes.
Thank you, Dr. Riemer. Nothing further.
Yes. Just a couple questions. I want to make sure I understand a couple of the answers you gave to the Attorney General. We previously established you did not see any real crime scene photos in this case.
Correct.
In many crime cases or some crime cases, do you look at crime scene photos to help you or assist you in your opinions concerning certain things in the autopsy?
No, honestly, I don't. It's my job to examine the body, and I come to my conclusions, and I don't really, look at the crime scene photos. I could potentially ask for them if I saw something very unusual, and I'll say, wow, how did that happen? Or sometimes I'll see an entrance gunshot wound that has, I'll assess it. There may be a lot of glass around it, and I'll say, well, did this go through a window first? And I'll ask that question. I don't necessarily have to look at the photos. So there is information that I might ask, but looking at the crime scene photos is really, not something that I do to help me come to a conclusion. Whatever's on the body, I will rely on what I see on the body, and if it fits with the crime scene photos, fine. But if not, I have my conclusions based on the body.
But you just conceded you do occasionally ask to see crime scene photos. Occasionally.
No, I don't ask to see the crime scene photos. I will ask to see, ask if something, like I just recently had a victim of multiple gunshot wounds, and I thought she may have been sitting in a car. Nobody told me anything like that because there was a bunch of glass fragments kind of on it. All the entrance wounds were to the left side and all the exit wounds were to the right, and then there were fragments of glass and kind of car parts banging into the skin. So I was like, was she in a car? But I don't ask to see the photos. Really, I don't. It's not part of my evaluation of the cause and manner of death doing an autopsy.
But like in this case, you had conversations with investigating officers, did you not?
At their request.
Did you have a conversation with SLED Agent Owens about the bruising on her calf?
Well, I did not actually observe that at the autopsy, so I really couldn't come to any conclusion. And it's very possible that was dirt from a shoe that was already gone by the time it came to me. I'm not autopsying the bodies at the scene. There's transport, there's movement into a body bag, but it may have been asked to me, but I distinctly said I didn't see that.
But you did have a meeting after the autopsy and your report with, I believe it's Lieutenant Owens with SLED, the chief investigating officer, and discussed did he show you the muddy print picture?
Objection beyond the scope.
Your Honor.
Objection is sustained.
Okay. Well, I think that's probably all I have. Thank you so much for being here
sure.
today. But an opinion is an opinion, right?
Yes.
Thank you.